What's up, gamers? It's your boy back at it again with the newest and dankest meme video. Today we're going to be discussing the real reason God hates our guts and how we're already in hell without even realizing it. In all seriousness, I'm not qualified to talk about suffering because it's a very touchy subject. But then again, no one is qualified to talk about this. How can you ever earn the right to talk about suffering when there are always those around you who suffer more than you do? I'm the luckiest human being on the planet because the hardship I face in life is minuscule compared to some of the other people out there that I happen to know, read about to be exact. Grass touching is a skill that requires a lot of work, which is something I don't think I can afford. At the same time, this line of reasoning that only the one who suffers most will have the right to talk about suffering also means that no one will ever be able to talk about the subject. This is not a sprint, okay? You won't get a medal for how many holocausts you go through like there's some kind of haunted house rides at Six Flags. Okay, that was really mean. If you're a Holocaust survivor watching this video, I'm sorry. I only made that dumb joke to make a point. At the same time, I want all of us to be able to talk freely about the subject of suffering because it's an integral part of our lives, regardless of intensity, and when we understand it better, more solutions might come to us so that we can live in more comfort, peace, and happiness. And the only way to understand something better is to talk about it or spend some thoughts on the subject. So you might often ask yourself the question, why did God create suffering? And I also ask this question myself many times. The problem with this question is that it implies a very specific idea of what God should be, which in this case, God would be a finite being and not the absolute. Only a finite God would ever have the need to do anything, such as to create specific things or destroy some other things. For example, if you redefine God as absolute infinity, as absolutely everything and not a finite being, you'll immediately start to see the question of why God created suffering starts to lose all meaning. First of all, let us quickly remind ourselves that our natural conditioning dictates everything that we do. If we believe in, think, or feel anything in our lives at all, we only do it in accordance with our survival agenda. We all want happiness and avoid suffering and death. It's important for us to realize that the question, why did God create suffering, is not asked by us, but is a result of our own conditioning. Our animal conditioning makes all the decisions and asks all the questions. We never get to decide on anything at all. The very fact that I'm talking about this with you is driven entirely by my own conditioning. When we deny our own free will, it will be easier for us to examine our own existence with less emotional bias and more objectivity, although this doesn't make a huge difference. Second of all, because God is absolutely infinite, you need to understand that God didn't create suffering, but that God created everything, and I mean absolutely everything, which includes all of the infinities that we as finite beings cannot perceive. So God created absolutely everything, and everything just happens to include suffering. At the same time, suffering and happiness are such fundamental aspects of our existence, it's very difficult to treat it like another regular object like a car or a pineapple pizza. Everything we know about life revolves around pain and bliss. The reason why you do anything at all is because you enjoy the activity, or you do it for a potential reward, which either makes you happy or help you avoid or alleviate suffering. However, no matter how fundamental these two attributes might be to our existence, suffering and bliss are still finite attributes because there exists an infinite number of things that are not suffering or happiness. This is why it would make sense to compare suffering to one specific number rather than all of the possible numbers in math. If you treat suffering as one single specific number, like say 3,754, the question of why God created suffering will start to lose any meaning. In this case, asking why God created suffering is the same as asking why the number 3,754 should exist. In math, all numbers exist. It would make no sense for some numbers to exist and not others. Likewise, God created everything, so everything must exist. You can't ask why something like suffering exists, because it is part of absolutely everything. It's what makes absolute infinity, well, absolutely infinite. But if God is absolutely infinite, why does our existence, which is finite, have to include suffering? I'd also like to point out that our aversion to suffering is also the main function of suffering itself. Suffering can only exist in the form of a particular feeling, a particular reaction in the mind and body. Why should suffering be any different from other types of experiences like love and peace? It's not that we're deciding that we don't like suffering, but that suffering itself is telling us how to feel and how to respond to negative experiences. It's similar to anesthesia. If your foot is under anesthetics and you step on a Lego, it's almost like the script where the foot will feel excruciating pain, which is suffering, is being replaced with another script that tells the foot to feel nothing. If I tell you that bad things are bad, I'll give you the impression that I might have brain damage because it's like saying fun things are fun. But at the same time, we never really bother enough to ask the question why some things make us feel a certain way and not other things. Why do we enjoy ice cream? Because we like ice cream. Do we? Do we really like ice cream, or is it just the animal conditioning telling you what to think and how to feel about it? The same is applied to everything else in our lives, including the bad stuff. Bad things are supposed to be bad, to be despised and avoided. but suffering is such a fundamental aspect to our lives that it's very difficult to say that it is up to the person to decide whether they like it or not. It's not the same as saying how some people like spicy foods while others don't, because all beings don't enjoy the things that cause them suffering. That's the function of suffering. If you enjoy suffering, then suffering isn't suffering anymore. By the way, I'm not talking about your tolerance of pain or masochism. I'm referring to the times when you do not enjoy an experience and you actively want to avoid it. A person can be immune to physical pain, but cannot stand the experience of some other aspects of life. That's the essence of suffering. By the way, I want to show you something pretty interesting. So suffering kind of sucks. We all agree that everyone and everything will all be better when there's less of that in the world. Not a single person will complain when Domino's put less pineapple on their pizza. Yet at the same time, all of our favorite movies, comics, mangas, novels, what have you, are rife with pineapple. Right now, I want you to go through the top 5 list of your best movies of all time, or your best novels of all time. Got your list? My prediction is that there are some pretty messed up pineapples in at least 4 out of these 5 titles, if not all 5 of them. I noticed that we can't enjoy a single movie when there's not at least some pineapple inside of it somewhere. It's almost like we cannot have a good story at all without adding at least the tiniest morsel of pineapple in our script. Sprinkle some of it on the character's head, put some of that on the trees, in the food, the water. Studies show that viewers tend to immediately walk away from theater when they cannot find a pineapple on the big screen for more than 15 seconds or 450 frames, or when any of the actors don't include the word pineapple in their lines for more than 3 sentences. Even if they don't explicitly use the term, they must word their delivery in a way that some of the words resemble pineapple, like, "What a nice pie, police." But in all seriousness, we simply do not have the intellect to craft a good story without using suffering as a plot device. If everything is going too smoothly, and the characters aren't getting into trouble in some way, or not being troubled by something, the story is not going anywhere, and is probably going to be bad. Even comedy cannot work without suffering. Watch any stand-ups, and you'll immediately notice that almost every good joke that's actually funny is about something messed up. Even kids' shows have to depend on it to be able to tell any story at all. I doubt that there's an episode where Barney just turns the world into a singularity, and all the children just go into samadhi for 25 minutes straight. Actually, that would be a pretty interesting ending to the show. The kids are always fighting and arguing and crying and being all sad for a billion different kinds of reasons. So one day, Barney just goes like F this and erase existence. Then the credits roll. That would have been a real 10 out of 10 avant-garde cinematic experience for the 5-year-old viewing demographic, if you ask me. So currently, we can't have good fiction without inflicting some kind of physical or emotional damage to our characters in some capacity. And this double standard of our love for great art and hatred of suffering is quite revealing of our true character. Myself included, of course. I used to think that I have pretty good taste in whatever I consume, but now I realize maybe I'm just a little skewed in the head. It doesn't really matter whether the characters or events are not real. Fiction is an exploration of ideas, of how something would turn out if a particular set of conditions are met. If the bad stuff can happen to these imaginary people, it can also happen to us, because art often reflects reality. Yet we can't help but fall in love with our favorite movies and books. Will we ever be able to create great art and tell compelling narratives without ever having to rely on suffering as a plot device? It depends on our level of intellect. If we can one day become smart enough for such a task to even become a possibility, then maybe. For now, the double standard is stuck here with you and I want you to simply be aware of that. You don't have to do anything about it. Simply knowing that it exists is good enough for me. But what can you do about all the suffering that's currently in your life? I don't know. You're going to have to look elsewhere, because when you watch my videos, you're going to leave with more questions than answers. But because you and I exist as finite beings, and we can only experience existence in little chunks and pieces, and not everything at once, we can choose to experience what we want to experience, one thing at a time. We can choose to live our entire lives without having to be reminded constantly that the number 3754 exists. At the end of the day, suffering is just one attribute, one thing that exists among infinite other things. The essence of suffering is this very specific emotion that makes the mind act a very specific way, and the point of suffering is to make you go, "I don't want that because I don't enjoy it," so that you will avoid it and find other kinds of experiences instead. Suffering wasn't created to achieve some kind of higher purpose in the grand scheme of things. It's just there, and it has some features. That's it. And they're not even cool features, like one of those hand-shaped selfie sticks that you bought to use once and never touched again. Just ask the cameraman to hold your hand. I'm sure he doesn't mind. Suffering is bad, but that's kind of the point, isn't it? Suffering is like an end of the magnet that only pushes other magnets away from it. But nobody asks why God created magnets, because it's just a thing in the universe. Likewise, suffering is just another thing among infinite other things in reality. The point of suffering is to repel, so you should interact with suffering the way it's designed, and do whatever you can to either overcome or avoid it. At the moment, that might seem like a really difficult task, But all obstacles can be overcome as long as you desire it. All finite beings have a will, and our will is the only thing that decides our future. If you decide that you want to forever be free from suffering, then you should desire that reality, and you continue to desire that future until it comes to fruition. This is how all dreams come true. Not all dreams come true, but no dreams would have ever become reality if you don't want it first. The very first step to having anything is to actually have a desire for it. Don't worry about the how, and let the universe do all the work. We don't have all the answers. In fact, we don't know anything. We simply do not have a single clue, and that's what it means to be a finite being.